that. Now, the government is working on the second policy of the Equalization Fund, and today we will be speaking to Dr. Jane Kiringai, the chairperson of the Commission for Revenue Allocation, to appreciate the fund trends. But before that, let's just take a look at what it has been like for the marginalized counties that are entitled to the Equalization Fund and how much they have gotten since the financial year 2014, 2015, 2016, as well as 2016-2017. So, of course, this second policy begins this financial year, 2018 to 2019. So let's quickly take a look at what these counties have gotten in the past 3 years. Of course, the criteria that is being used for the sharing of the revenue, and Dr. Kiringai will be telling us why which county gets what. She will be explaining that. And, of course, the allocation in millions of shillings. So Turkana County received the largest sum of money from the Equalization Fund in the past 3 years in the first policy with 1 billion shillings, and then followed, of course, with 9.8% of the revenue allocated, the shared revenue. Then Mandera follows closely with 8.2%, which translated to 967.6 million shillings for the county of Mandera. Wajir follows with 7.88% from the sharing revenue, which translates to 928.8 million shillings for the county of Wajir in the Equalization Fund. Marsabit with 7.1%, which translated to 886.2 million shillings. Samburu at 7.37, translating to about 869.7 million shillings. Remember, these are the 14 counties that has been mapped into the marginalized counties and entitled to the Equalization Fund from the national government. West Pokot County with 7.3%, which is 866.1 million. Tana River at 7.28%, with 859 million shillings that they have received over the past 3 years. And Narrow County at 6.86 at 8.09.5 million shillings. Kwale County at 6.74% of the shared revenue, getting 795.3 million, and Garissa at 6.64 at 783.5 million shillings. These are the 14 counties. And of course, as the Commission for Revenue Allocation now puts down the second policy and how the money will be disbursed, it will be interesting to see even the past 3 years, what has this meant for these particular 14 counties. Kilifi County comes in at 6.47 with the 763.5%, and at number 12 is tight at Taveta, 6.37, which translated to 751.7 million shillings. Isiolo at 13 with 6.33, 746.4 million shillings. And finally, Lamu County, which is the 14th county, got 6.12% of the shared revenue, which translated to 722.2 million shillings in the 3 financial years that I have stated. Of course, the total being 12.4 billion shillings. So these are the numbers as far as the Equalization Fund is concerned, and how this particular revenue was shared and the criteria that was used vis-a-vis the amount of money that they got in the past 3 financial years. And even as we head into the second policy, we now want to interrogate how have the past 3 years been like, what has it meant for those who live in these particular counties and the administrations in these particular counties, of course, as well as what will the second policy be like. I now want to speak to Dr. Jane Kiringai. She's the chairperson of the Commission for Revenue Allocation. She now joins us live from our City Centre studios. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on KTN News Desk. The first policy done and dusted, and we've just seen the numbers in terms of the money that these counties received in the past financial year. As a chairperson of the CRA, do you think this meant much to these counties?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And yes, indeed, this money actually meant a lot for these counties. In this first policy, you've actually just highlighted the numbers that different counties got. And remember, the Constitution is very clear in the areas where this money is to be used. The money is supposed to address access to water, to health, electricity, and roads, among others. And after the 14 counties were identified, then the Equalization Fund Board, which is the agency responsible for identifying the projects, then went out and did a lot of stakeholder consultation with the communities for them to identify what their priorities are. So most of these counties held consultations. They included there the registrars, that is the members of parliament, and several projects were identified. And in some of these included boreholes, some of these included health facilities, and in that first policy, it also included education as one of the areas to be covered. And you will agree with me, in a place where you're allocating something like 700 million Kenya shillings, and you identify boreholes as a priority for the community, that money can go a long way. And I want to say that implementation is at different stages in different counties. There are counties like Garissa, where they say they have implemented most of the projects are identified. In other counties, implementation has been low as 26%. And it's basically because perhaps the process of identification, the agreement between the readers and the communities took a bit of time. But in some places where these projects have actually been completed, like boreholes, yes, they've actually made a big difference to the communities, because it is actually meant to improve access. Where the policy identifies that the gap is really huge, they make a big difference. Yes, we have seen the communities that have benefited. Yes, there's been a big impact, but again, we want to actually argue that implementation has been slow. And one of the challenges with the implementation of the last policy is that, remember, once the projects has been identified, there has to be an act, Appropriation Act, which permits then or paves way for implementation of projects. After the first Appropriation Act was passed, it then lapsed in the financial year 15-16, and it took time before there was legal interpretation on exactly where the implementation could continue before another act was put in place. That took a lot of time to get the legal advice, and finally it was actually clear that another Appropriation Act needed to be enacted for implementation to continue, and this is the one that the President assented to only last month. So you can see there was a huge gap. There was a lapse of exactly about between June and May. Nothing was going on because there was no act in place to permit funds to start flowing to those projects. That actually has been one of the bottlenecks. And the challenge again is now the act will lapse again on the 30th of June. There has to be now a third Appropriation Act that will then allocate funds from the first policy and the second policy for implementation to continue.
So then as we head into the second policy that will be launched, I think, on Thursday, what do we expect?
In the second policy that we'll be launching next week, what you can expect is the Commission decided to change the approach of identifying marginalised places. And we are moving away from identifying marginalised counties to a lower unit of analysis so that we can better target the funds to the lowest need. That's sort of one of the big differences between the first policy and the second policy. And let me take you one step back. How were the first set of counties identified? The first policy, the approach was slightly different from what the one adopted in the second policy. The Commission went out and looked at the historical injustices reports and ranked counties based on that report. Then the second thing the Commission then developed a development index for the counties and again ranked them from the worst to the best. And the third thing that the Commission did is then went out and undertook a perception survey and went out and asked citizens, who do you think are the most marginalised? And again, based on how the responses from that questionnaire, again, counties were ranked from the best to the worst. So the Commission put in together all these three indicators together and then asked, how are the counties faring based on these three criteria? And any county that appeared in the first two, either in the historical injustices or in the development index or in the perception survey, any counties that qualified under those two criteria was then the qualifying county. So then the cutoff are the 14% that you actually highlighted in the screen. Then development, what is called then the allocation criteria, interacting all these indicators together. You then rank again the counties from the ones with the deepest levels of marginalization to the ones which are slightly better off, to come up with the criteria that is used to allocate the funds. That's what you saw on the screen. So in the second policy, we'll follow a different approach, and once we launch the policy, it will become clear who are the qualifying areas. And again, like I said, it's not constituencies, it's not counties. We have gone to a lower unit of analysis. We are using sub-locations as a unit of analysis in the second policy. And again, the allocation criteria will also be based at the sub-location. Because remember, this Equalization Fund is only 0.5% of the last audited and approved revenues. And in the budget that will be led on Thursday, this is just about 4.5 billion shillings that has been allocated in the next financial year. But that's not to say that's the only money in the Equalization Fund. There is money from the previous years that will also be appropriated in the next policy. So the policy does not end with the allocation of 1 year. It is with the funds that have been accumulated already in the Equalization Fund. The funds that you're showing on the screen a short while ago is actually funds for 3 financial years. It is the money that was allocated in the Equalization Fund in the financial year 14-15, 15-16, and 16-17. So the 12.4 billion that was allocated in the first policy was those financial years. The second policy will allocate money that since the fund was set up and in the years to come for about 5 years. So the act or the policy does not depend only on the money. We won't only appropriate the money that will be in the budget led on Thursday. There will be some other money which is already in the Equalization Fund and also for the next 3 years, so to speak.
That we are changing tact in this second policy, does it mean that we are not comfortable with the survey that informed these 14 counties, or we just think that there are more locations that deserve to be part of this Equalization Fund? What informed this decision to change tact for the second policy?
What informed that decision is once you identify just a county, then it means the money can be applied anywhere in the county. But remember, the Constitution is very clear. It doesn't talk about a marginalized county. It talks about marginalized areas. And the lessons that we learned from the first policy is that when you allocate money to a county, there is a risk that it doesn't really go to the most needy areas in a county. In the first policy, the members of parliament actually opted to divide the money equally among all the constituencies. Whether they were prosperous or really lagging areas within the county, they all benefited equally from the first policy. And our view was, or still is, if you share these funds equally across the entire county, it is unlikely to have any meaningful impact. There is a risk that the money may even be used at the county headquarters. There was a risk given that the money will be used for street lighting in some areas. But actually, when you go to the ground, you realize the needs are really very local, and the communities down on the ground know exactly what you want. But if it's shared equally in the entire county, there's a risk it will really never go to the most deserving in the county. That's sort of what informed our new approach, that it's a small fund. Marginalization is so specific to a very small area, and then you really need to target it very clearly or very directly to have a really meaningful impact. But if you need a borehole in one sub-location where actually they've traveled like 40 kilometers to get water, if it is a place where children walk for 40 kilometers to school in the morning, a place where they wake up at 3 a.m. to make it to school at 9, these are the places where the money needs to go. The recognition that even in very prosperous counties, you have very, very, very local areas that really need these funds. Number two, the other the other lesson that informed the new approach, you realize that in the list of counties that you read, a county like Kajiado was not there. A county like Baringo was not there. This, in the previous rank, a county like Kitui also was not there. But if you look at the water situation in some of these places, it is so dire that if you take averages in access to either water, health, education at the county level, there are some counties that are very, very different, that may appear prosperous but have deep, deep pockets of marginalization. And Kajiado and Baringo are a very good example. If you take the average education attainment, for example, in Kajiado County, because you have very prosperous places like Gong, Rongai, Kitengela, the average for the county looks very good. But if you move away from the average of the entire county, there are deep pockets of marginalization in Kajiado, where there are no schools, there are no health facilities. So if you take all these, if you take marginalization at the county level, you will miss these deep, deep pockets of marginalization. The same thing we did when we did the averages for a county like Baringo. The averages would show that the county is well off. But if you go down to the bottom, you go to a place like Tiati. These are places where children go to school at age 13 and drop out at age 17. There are places where you have, thanks to CDF, they've been able to build some schools. But again, there are no teachers and there are no health facilities. So that really is what informed that if you take county level averages, you start the risk of not really identifying the deep, deep pockets of marginalization. And number two, there's a risk of splitting the money equally in the entire county. So that's what we're trying to cure in the new approach.
All right, and of course, we'll be looking forward to seeing that report when it's finally released by the Commission for Revenue Allocation. That is Dr. Jane Kiringai. She's the chairperson at the Commission for Revenue Allocation, saying in the second policy, they will now be changing tact, taking it down to sub-locations across the counties and not necessarily counties. I want us to take a short break as we wrap up the first hour of KTN News Desk. In the second hour, we still continue to give you updates and, of course, what is happening across our borders. We'll be getting an update on the Ugandan Member of Parliament who was assassinated last week from our reporter in Uganda. And, of course, at 2:30 p.m., Robinson Okenya will be coming in with sports news. Don't go too far.